All right. So, a couple things before we get started. I put up an announcement, and things might have changed. I'll hopefully have an answer this afternoon. So, I originally had my original office hours, and I changed them to be in the afternoon. I'm not 100% sure whether or not the thing I thought was going to be occurring in the morning may have now changed. So, keep an eye out on Canvas announcements later this afternoon. My office hours might revert back to what they normally are tomorrow. I'll post an announcement either way, kind of confirming exactly what 3-hour time block I'll be available in my office tomorrow. I imagine there's a higher likelihood that it's going to be earlier in the day from 9:30 to 12:30, which are my typical office hours. But it's not 100% sure yet. I'm kind of waiting on a call back, which hopefully I have after class. So keep an eye out in Canvas for that. I also wanted to mention something I mentioned last week. As you're thinking about reviewing for the exam, that Module 4 quiz was not viewable until after the due date. So last night at 1 a.m., it's now set to be where you can go in, review your results, and kind of use that as an additional practice material. So the things that I would study going into this exam, try to do this last class where I laid these out. What's the first thing I would suggest reviewing for this exam? The practice exams. I've given you 2 of them. Those are going to be the most representative of the difficulty and the types of questions you will see on the exam. If you then want additional questions, like so the next thing I would look at would be module quizzes. Then what tries to prepare you for the module quizzes? Practice problems. If you're still wanting things after that, it's a lot of questions. I might then look at in-class questions or module read. But as you kind of go down that list, they're going to be less and less representative of the types and difficulty of questions you'll see on the exam. So that thing that will be the most reflective of the exam, try to name it so that it's obvious, would be the practice exams. Okay, that's what I would spend the majority of my time focusing on studying for this exam. Okay, so for the exam on Thursday, it'll be where? Not a trick question. Right here. Right? It's an in-class exam. It starts at the normal time that class starts, so 9:35. It'll go to when class ends, so 10:50. Now, I will be here early. I have an exam in the section right before this. I will try to get them out as quickly as possible so that you can then begin to file in. I will have 5 proctors helping me, so get here early. So once that other section gets out, you can get in here so that we can get started right at 9:35 to give you as much possible time, or as much time as possible, right? So right 9:35, the proctors, some will start in the back, some will start up front, some will start in the middle. We'll start handing out exams. Once those exams are handed out, I will then kind of say, if you want additional scratch paper, you can raise your hand. I'll have plenty of extra scratch paper that you can use. You can also write on the exam itself, right? There's plenty of space in the margin. So if you want to get going, you can kind of start. You can use the exam to write on. And then if at any point during the exam you want some additional scratch paper, you don't have to get it right away. At any point during the exam, if you raise your hand and want some additional scrap paper, you can hand it out then as well. Okay? So the things that you will need for the exam is something to write with. It helps me out and helps you out. Get grades back a little quicker. Probably if you use a pencil, right, and circle things in darkly. So it's a 25 question multiple choice exam. You can use pen, but if you want to change your answer, you can't erase it. All right. So you can put like an X through it, and usually that's fine. It's just in the scanning process. Sometimes it doesn't read that. I have to go back and do some stuff manually. It just takes me a little bit longer to get grades back to you. But a pen is fine. So just something to write with, right? Fill out that bubble sheet. You also need a calculator. I said all you should need is the most basic 4-function calculator: addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. If you work through those practice exam questions, I think you'll find you don't need anything more difficult or anything more complicated than that. All right. So if you want more than a 4-function calculator, if there's something that you use for other classes, like a scientific calculator, that's okay. You can use a calculator as long as it doesn't have any graphing capabilities, right? So you can't be able to store anything in that calculator. If you can store things in the calculator, if I was a student, what might I store there? Notes. So if I see you with a calculator that has storing or graphing capabilities, I'm going to assume, well, you didn't do what I told you to do, so I'm going to assume that you're using it to store notes. I'm going to take that exam, and you're going to get a 0. Okay? So a non-graphing calculator, nothing you can store in again, the most basic calculator that you have. Once again, if you don't have one, go to the dollar store or any of these, like, probably even a gas station. All you need is like the most basic, like 4 functions, $1 calculator. Okay? Another thing, if you have your phone out at any point during the exam, what do you think I think you're doing? It's not a difficult question. If you have your phone out, what do you think I'm going to do? Take your exam, give you a 0. Okay? I mean, that seems to me obvious, but maybe not based on the responses I just got. If you have your phone out during the exam, you can access the internet. I mean, you know, so you cannot have your phone out at any point during the exam. If me or one of the proctors sees that, your exam will be taken right away. Okay? The only time that you can have your phone out during the exam is when you turn your exam in at the end of class, which will be right up here. You need to show your crimson card so I know that it's actually you that took the exam, right? So that should only be shown when you get up here to turn your exam in, because I think they're all digital now, so you'll have to kind of pull it up on your phone. Make sure you know how to do that before Thursday's class. But when you hand the exam in, you can then take your phone out to show your crimson card. At no other point during the exam should it be out. Okay? I think you make sure I wrote a list because I don't want to forget anything that I didn't say. I think that should be everything that I wanted to mention. Are there any other logistical questions that you had about the exam before we kind of dive into content stuff here today? No? Okay. The only other thing I did want to mention before we get going, I think, at least speaking with some of you, I mentioned that CL session that was canceled because of the storm. I was tentatively thinking about adding something after this week's exam. I've changed my mind because I don't think it would be very valuable to you because there's no new content to cover. They could start going over the content we'll go through next week. I don't think that will be as valuable because you'll still have CL sessions that review that content the following week. So what I'm going to try to do is add in or replace that CL session before the final exam, because we'll have a week of review where I can actually get some CL sessions that just do exam review. So I think being able to schedule with my CL leaders sometimes during that week is going to be a lot more valuable to you, and also replaces that kind of Monday CL session I was missed because of the snowstorm. Okay. So there will be no CL sessions this Thursday, Monday, because there's no new content to cover. Okay. But I will be replacing that missed CL session of those Monday night sessions with some as we get closer to that final exam. Okay. Any other questions before we get going here? So all we're going to do today is I'm going to ask you for what questions you guys want to work through. You technically ask me questions on anything. What did I mention, though, is probably what I would start studying for the exam, practice exams. So my guess is if you've taken a look at these, this is probably what you want to be asking me questions on today. Okay. So where does anyone want to start? This is for you. I didn't have to have class today. I want to review questions to make sure you guys are prepared. So does anyone have questions over any question on the practice exam? All right, quick class. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So number 5. This is where you gotta be brave. Right? I mean, just speak up a little bit. I ask the questions that you want to see answers to. Even if you didn't look at it, glance through it real quick. It's on Canvas, right? Any questions that you want to kind of see work through, that's what today's class is for, okay? So I can almost guarantee you, when I say almost, I wrote the exam, so almost probably isn't a good word, but you will see a question that looks like this on the exam. It's a difficult question, right? So you're going to be given 2 individuals and 2 different goods. The way that these tables are depicted and the information you're told is that this is if they're using all of their resources, the amount of each one of these goods they can produce. Now, a question like 4 is simply asking for comparative. What'd you say? Yeah. So 4 is used for, this table is used for question 4 and 5, right? So question 4 might be as simple as asking you about comparative and absolute advantages, what we will probably discuss along the way of actually asking or answering question 5, right? So we're given this information, so that's for the next two questions. This is where, when you're taking the exam, read carefully. I will sometimes give you information that you need to use for the next few questions, right? Kind of telling you that here. So I'll kind of abbreviate some of this just so we can kind of go through all this work. So I had who? Teresa, Carrie, I had hamburgers and steaks. And the numbers we were given were 24, 40, 8, and 10. Okay. So what I'm thinking about is I want to build out this two-person economy-wide production possibilities group. I could do this a lot of different ways. I'm just going to choose one of those goods to put on the x-axis. I'll give you a little bit of a hint. It's probably easier to work through these problems by putting the good that has the lower numbers on your x-axis. Just it makes it a little, you can do it either way, right? But it usually makes it a little bit easier to put that good that has the lower values on your x-axis. So if these numbers represent, if I'm using all of my resources, Teresa can produce 24 hamburgers, or if she's using all of her resources to produce steaks, she can produce 8. So if I'm thinking about if I have this two-person economy, what's the total number of steaks I could produce? Well, Teresa's producing 8. Harry's producing 10. This is where getting feedback today is going to make us have more time to go through more questions. 8 from one person, 10 from the other person. The total I have is 18, right? What if I'm only producing hamburgers? 64, right? I can find these two extreme points relatively easily, right? So what I'm then going to do is about who do I want to rely on first to produce that x-axis good? Whoever can produce it at the lowest cost, which tells me that person has a comparative advantage, right? So I'm thinking about, I want to first start producing this with whoever has the lower cost or a pretty flat slope. And then eventually I'm going to have to start relying on the other person, which they're going to be able to produce this at a higher cost or a steeper slope. Right? So one thing I would need to kind of build this out or might be helpful, and this would help me answer question 4, right? If I were to draw out the individual curve for both of these individuals, for Teresa, this is going to be what? 24 and 8. So what's the slope of my curve here? The change in y over the change in x. So 24 over 8, technically negative 24. I have a slope of negative 3. What does the slope of the production possibility curve tell me? The cost of my x-axis good. All right. If I did the same thing for Carrie here, 40 and 10, my slope would be what? Negative 40 over 10 or negative 4. So part of question 4 was who has the comparative advantage in steak production? Well, who can produce it at a lower cost? Teresa, right? So that's the first person I want to rely on to start producing that x-axis good. So initially, my slope is going to be Teresa's cost, right? Or Teresa's slope of her individual production possibilities curve. Now, as she starts to produce more steaks, what is she going to have to stop producing? The y-axis good, right? These were using all of her resources. She could only get 24 hamburgers, or using all of her resources, only 8 steaks. So as she starts to produce more steaks, she's going to have to give up those hamburgers she was producing. So at this kind of kink point where my slope would change, what this represents is where both individuals are producing what they have a comparative advantage in. So Teresa's going to be producing these steaks, but once she gets to 8, she doesn't have any resources to produce any more than that. Now, once she gets to only producing steaks, how many hamburgers has she given up producing? 24. Right? She's not producing any hamburgers at that point. So the point on our production possibilities curve, our economy-wide, the only person left producing hamburgers is Harry. Right? So we've got kind of these extreme points where we're only producing one good. We then have this point in the middle where each person is producing just what they have a comparative advantage in. We then were given 4 points and asked which of these is on our production possibilities curve. So this is where we need to start to test out and see, okay, are these points on our curve? So the first point was 64 hamburgers and 18 steaks. So where would that be? Somewhere out here. Is that point going to be on my curve? Well, if I can produce 64 hamburgers and 0 steaks, how can I produce 64 and 18? I don't have enough resources. Right? Now, another point that was given was 40 hamburgers and 8 steaks. This problem might be a little bit easier than what you see on the exam, right? But we're going to need to know that point. So that point is on our curve. We could technically answer question 5 already. I don't even have to test the other 2. Right? Now, if I didn't give you this kind of point in the middle where both people are producing what they have a comparative advantage in, how would I make the distinction between 3 other points? Well, so let's say we didn't have this point as one of our options. The second thing we have is 52 hamburgers and 6 steaks. So what I would do is think about, okay, if I was producing 6 steaks, how many hamburgers to move to that point would I have to give up? Well, if each steak cost me 3 hamburgers, what's the kind of total cost? 6 times 3, or to get those 6 steaks, I'm going to have to give up 18 hamburgers. So I'd be moving from 64 to what value? What, 58, so 46, if I'm doing math in my head correct there. So the point on my curve is 6 steaks, 46 hamburgers. The point I was given was 6 steaks and 52. So that point would not be attainable, right? It's above my production possibilities curve. Now, the other potential point I had was 10 steaks and 24 hamburgers. Well, what point would be on my curve at 10 steaks? Well, here, as I kind of go past 8, how much is each steak going to cost me now? I've used all of Teresa's resources. Who am I going to have to now start relying on? The other individual. Their costs were a little bit higher. So these additional 2 steaks that I want from this point where both people are only producing what they have in a comparative advantage in, how many additional steaks do I want? 2. Each one is costing me 4 hamburgers, so the total cost would be 8. So I've been moving from what? 40 to 32. So the point on my curve is 1032. The hypothetical point I was given was 1024. So that point I would call what? It wasn't unattainable. It was inefficient. I wasn't using all of my resources. So I may not make this as easy as giving you this kind of point as a potential answer. Maybe I had the same setup, but instead of giving you 8 and 40 as a potential option, maybe I gave you, let me think here what I want. Let's say I gave you 24 hamburgers and 12 steaks. Okay. How could I check to see if that point's on my curve? Well, if I want to get to 12 steaks, I'm only relying on carry at this point. So to go from 8 to 12, how many total hamburgers am I going to have to give up? Well, if I want 4 steaks, each one costs me 4 hamburgers. That's going to be a total of 16. Moving from 40 minus 16 would put me at a value of what? 24. So sure enough, that point is on my curve. So we could test any of these hypothetical points in a similar manner, right? As long as you can build out that 2-person kind of economy-wide production possibilities curve, we can test all these points. And some of the other questions, like we could answer question 4 along the way, which is who has a comparative advantage in steak production, whoever has the lowest cost. Now, just to kind of make this point, and this was question 4, not 5, if Teresa has a comparative advantage in steak production, we said the cost of my x-axis good is always what? The slope of my individual's production possibilities curve. If I instead want the cost of my y-axis good, that's going to be what? 1 over the slope. So here, anytime I do the inverse, notice what was the cost of 1 additional steak to Teresa and Carrie? We had 3 and kind of 4. What's going to be the cost of instead 1 of the additional y-axis good? 1 over 3 and 1 over 4. So what's always going to be true is whoever has a lower cost in one good, they're going to have a greater cost in the other. I can only have a comparative advantage in one good at a time. So here, Teresa, we identified, she has a comparative advantage in state production. I don't even have to do the math. Automatically, I should know the other person has the comparative advantage in the other good. Now I can do the math, prove that to myself. This would be one, another kind of thing we could answer with that kind of 2x2 matrix box. Any questions on this before we kind of move to the next question that someone has? Any other questions people want to see work through here? So, if I'm looking at 15 and 16, right, I've got a supply and a demand equation. I'm then asked about the marginal benefit, and I'm asked about equilibrium, prices, and quantity. So, oops, I did not mean to do that. Let's go back. There we go. This is what I meant to do. So I was given what? My demand curve was price is equal to 80 minus 2Q. And then supply was price is equal to 20 plus 4Q. So here's where showing up to class in these review sessions might be helpful. Let's say I didn't give you this information and I simply gave you these two equations. Which one do you know? I mean, I kind of spoiled it, but why do you know this one has to be demand? Because it's downward slope. We know that as I increase the price, do people want to buy more or less of a good? Less of it. Whereas supply is always going to have a positive slope when we draw it, because as I increase the price, do producers want to sell more or less of the good? Even more, right? So even if I didn't give you this information, you should be able to identify based on the slope of these equations that when I have a negative slope, that's my demand curve, and a positive slope is my supply curve. Now we said when I draw this out, I always have this increasing supply curve and this decreasing demand curve. That's why we knew which equation was which based off the slope. Supply represents marginal costs, which means as we produce more of something, we're relying on less and less efficient workers, our marginal costs will increase. We said demand, marginal benefits are going down because as you buy more of something, each additional unit is worth less than the one you had before. So where is our equilibrium point here? Where supply is equal to demand, right? So how can we find that point? Well, before we get there, right, the first question was, what's the marginal benefit of the 8th unit? So if our demand curve reflects marginal benefits, this price from the demand curve reflects the first price where someone would be willing to buy that good. The first price must be where the marginal benefit is equal to their marginal cost. So for a consumer, the price is their marginal cost, right? So as soon as that price is exactly equal to their marginal benefit, they'll buy that good. So we can think about price from the demand curve as reflecting marginal benefits. Price from our supply curve is reflecting producers' marginal costs. So I could actually ask you either question. What's the marginal benefit of the 8th unit? All I do is take that equation. If I want to know the 8th unit, for quantity, I plug in 8. So this would be what here? Oh, sorry. Minus, right? This would be, what, 80 minus 16. So, what, 64? I'm doing math in my head correct here. What if I wanted the marginal cost of the 8th unit? Well, there I'm using my supply curve, plugging in that value of 8. So I get what? 32 plus 20, or the marginal cost is 52. This question didn't ask this, but is this market in equilibrium at the 8th unit? No, because what should be true about the equilibrium? The marginal cost is equal to the marginal benefit, or supply is equal to demand. So I could ask you a similar question, things I would make sure I know how to do. Identify which of these equations is supply and demand based off the sign of the slope, right? That might be something in the practice exam that I didn't do that I might do on the exam. When I'm saying might, I probably should talk more definitive. I wrote the exam, right? I can find either the marginal benefits by using that demand equation, plugging in the quantity I want to find the marginal benefit of, and the price reflects that to me. I can find the marginal cost of any unit by plugging in the quantity into my supply curve, and I know that price would reflect the marginal cost of producers. So if I instead want to find the equilibrium point, which I believe was the next question 16, what are my steps? The first step is I need to set my supply equal demand. That's the point I'm looking for. So I've got what? 80 minus 2Q is equal to 20 plus 4Q. I will then solve for that equilibrium quantity. So I do a little bit of algebra here. You know, I subtract 20 from both sides. I've got what? 60 minus 2Q would be equal to 4Q. Add 2Q to both sides. I've got what? 60 is equal to 6Q. Divide both sides by 6. And I get, I'm running out of room here, but my quantity, my equilibrium quantity is 10. So I just found the equilibrium quantity. How do I then do the third step, which is I need to then solve for my equilibrium price? Well, I have two ways I can do this. If I'm in equilibrium, what should be true about the marginal cost and the marginal benefit? They should be exactly the same. So I could either plug this into my demand equation. In fact, this might be a good way to check my math. Plug it into both, right? So if I plug this into my demand equation, 80 minus 2 times 10 would give me that value of 60. If I plug it into my supply equation, hopefully, oh, sure enough, I get that same equilibrium price of 60. If I don't get the same value here, I know I made a math error somewhere, right? And then I might want to go back and revisit my algebra, right? Just to make sure I had the correct equilibrium quantity first, because I need the correct equilibrium quantity to then solve for the equilibrium price. Any questions on either of those? Any other questions you want to see worked through? Yeah, so if I remember right, that's the one about studying. Okay. So this is going back to kind of module 1 type stuff. Now, if you notice, I wrote the exam. What kind of questions did I start out with? Module 1. Then you start to see questions that were module 2. I wrote the practice exams in the same kind of manner I wrote the exam. Makes it a little bit easier to do this. All right. So if we're back at question 2, we're probably looking at module 1. Right. So if I'm thinking about, I've got the optimal number of hours. So here's where we talked about, I choose to do something as long as the marginal benefit is greater than or equal to my marginal costs. So what must be true when I was choosing to study 4 hours, we said, as I do more of something, the marginal costs are increasing and the marginal benefits are decreasing. This is where we set ourselves up to eventually then talk about markets, supply and demand, which were really just reflective of marginal cost and marginal benefit. So the same kind of intuition we had for decision making by the individual was the same concepts that played out when we look at many individuals in a market. All right, supply and demand reflected marginal benefits and marginal costs. So if I'm choosing the optimal number of hours, and it was 4, if instead I choose to study for 2 hours, well, let's just think intuitively. If I choose to study less, what could have happened to the costs? The additional cost of studying, why would I choose to do less of something if the costs went up? Right? Now, marginal costs increasing, right, would be like, okay, if at every number of hours studied, my marginal costs are now higher. Well, I didn't draw this quite right. The new optimal point would be this lower value, right? So I could have seen that my marginal costs went up, which would mean that before, for every quantity in between 2 and 4, the marginal benefits were greater than the marginal costs. But now when the marginal costs are higher, now for every unit in this range, now the costs are greater than the benefits. So I no longer choose to study that 3rd and 4th hour. I stopped at 2. Okay. Now, I don't think this was given as a potential answer. Let me see. No, it wasn't. But what's another thing that could produce the same change in the optimal number of hours? Either my marginal cost could be higher, or my marginal benefits could actually go down, right? So if instead, at every point, I saw that my marginal benefits actually went down, maybe now that new number of hours study is down to 2 as well. So marginal cost going up or marginal benefits going down would lead to me doing less of something. If the reverse was true, let's say I went, instead of studying 4 hours, I now study for 6. What could have been true there? Either the marginal costs have went down or the marginal benefits have went up. Say that again. So that, first of all, the table is kind of representing, oh, sorry. You're saying if I look at 4 relative to 2. So this table goes with question 3, right? So the table comes before the question that it goes with. So that's actually asking you the optimal number of Netflix. So question 2 is just saying, let's assume you have this hypothetical optimal value of 4. It then changes to 2. The only way that can occur is if your marginal costs have increased or your marginal benefits have decreased. Yeah, so give me 1 second. I'm going to finish this one. So what could have been also true is some other distractor answers there, but could end up being true if I change them, is what is happening to total benefits and total costs. So if I want the total benefit of consuming 4 units, what is that going to be? Well, it's the additional benefit I got from buying the first, or the first hour I studied, the additional benefit I got from studying 2 hours, the additional benefit I got from studying the third, and the additional benefit I got from studying the fourth. So if I instead go from 4 hours to 2 hours studied, what is my total benefit of only studying for 2 hours? The marginal benefit of the first and the marginal benefit of the second. If I choose to do less of something, what has to be true about my total benefit? It's going to include the same marginal benefits as doing a higher amount, but missing some. So what is that marginal benefit? Sorry, what is the total benefit when I choose to do less of something? It always is going to be going down. All right. So when I was going from studying for 4 to 2 hours, I know the total benefit is going to be less. Total benefits are not the same as marginal costs and marginal benefits, right? This is the marginal benefit of just the first unit, the marginal benefit of just the fourth. The total benefit is adding up those marginal benefits for every single unit up to whatever point you're going to. Okay. Now, the same kind of rule would apply if I'm looking at marginal costs. So if I'm looking at the marginal cost of the first 4, if I'm looking at the total cost of the first 4, that's the marginal cost of each of those first 4 units. So what has to be true about the total cost if I change to instead only study for 2 hours? Well, my total costs have to be going down. So even though the marginal cost led to me studying fewer hours, when I studied fewer hours, my total costs were actually going to be lower. So this is making that distinction between totals and margin. Any questions on this one before we move?
So
if I choose to do less of something, so the only way I would choose, the only way the optimal number of what I'm doing goes down, it could be that I see higher marginal costs, but I also said it could be what? No change in cost, but a decrease in marginal benefits. So either of those would lead to me studying for a fewer optimal number of hours. That's just, I gave you a hypothetical value, right? So you're thinking about here the directional change. So I could have changed these numbers to be 10 and 5, and the exact same thing would apply. I mean, it's just that I'm doing something less, so I know that the directional changes. I'm just, so, yeah, I'm just giving you hypothetical values, right? I'm giving you these numbers so you can think about I'm decreasing the optimal number. I could have given you 10 and 5. I could have given you 120. I could, any values where you're lowering the amount, and I'm just asking about directional changes. Yeah. Any other questions on this one? So you had the question next?
It's like the second.
So question 6. Okay. So this is where I was given a bunch of information. So I want to start to kind of identify what I've got. This switches over for me. Lost my desktop. There it goes. It's back on. So I'm told I'm currently producing 50 boats, 150 jet skis, and I know the opportunity cost of a boat. So what tells me the cost of my x-axis good? The slope. So if I know the cost of a good, what do I probably want to put it on? Makes it easier if I put that good on the x-axis. I know its cost, I would know the slope. Okay? So I've been given this information where I'm producing 2 goods, boats and jet skis. I know the cost of an additional boat, so I'm going to put boats on my x-axis. Why is this not popping up to us here? If we get the desktop back on. Okay. Docking the camera back on. Oh. All right. Let's try something else here. We might have to do some pivoting if this isn't working for me. So we've got try turning it on and back on. Here we go. No signal from my device, even though we were using it. Okay. Let's see if this works. Oh. All right. Let me try this here. I don't think that we can fix it. Well, it shouldn't even matter that I have this set up. So okay, well, let's try this. So what do I need to go to? I need to go to settings. I need to have it not mirror. So can we see this? Yes. Okay. So sorry, it's working, but it's for some reason not working on the projector. So let's say we have this question. And I'm looking at an economy-wide production possibilities curve. I know the cost of an additional boat is 5 jet skis. So when I'm looking at an economy-wide production possibilities curve, it's going to be that as I produce more of something, just like in our simple 2-person example, I had to start using people who are less and less efficient. So what's going to happen to the value of my slope? Well, as I produce more of something, if I'm looking at less and less efficient workers, my costs are going to be going up. The steeper my slope, the slope tells me the cost of what good? X-axis good. So the current point that I'm at, I was told is at 50 boats and 150 jet skis. The cost at that point or my slope was for every additional boat, I was having to give up 5 jet skis. Okay. So the first part of the question, I believe, and this is where I can't now toggle back and forth, so you'll have to kind of tell me if I'm getting something wrong. I can only view one of these at a time now since this isn't working. So how do I find instead the cost of my y-axis good? We said earlier that was 1 over the slope. So if I asked you for the cost of a jet ski here, that's going to be 1/5 of a boat, right? Or 0.2 boats. I think that was the first question in that problem. Now, the second question is if I produce fewer boats, right? So I'm moving from this point to say up here. What's happening to my slope? It's getting, what's the slope of a completely horizontal line? 0. So if my slope is getting flatter, the cost of my x-axis good, or in this case, the cost of a boat, is going down, which was the second part of that question. Now, what I could do is change the second part of that question to asking you instead, what is happening to the cost of a jet ski or my y-axis good? So if I produce fewer boats, my slope is getting flatter, the cost of a boat is going down. The cost of these two goods are inversely related. So if my slope is going down, what's happening to this fraction? It's going up. So as I produce fewer boats, the cost of a boat is going down, but the cost of a jet ski, my y-axis good, is going up. I could ask you for either one of those. And then this is one where I'm at, people ask me, where do I get additional questions, or how, if I went through the practice exam, what can I do? Start to look at those questions I give you in the practice exam and think about, well, what if I was asked the opposite? A lot of these questions, you can just change increase to decrease, right? And it gives you a whole different question to work through. So if I instead increase boat production, well, what's now happening to the cost of a boat? My slope is getting steeper, so the cost of that x-axis good is going up, which inherently means if that slope is going up, what's happening to this fraction, or the cost of my y-axis good jet skis would be going down. A lot of these questions I would think about, how can Professor Landis change things? Increase to decrease, it's an obvious one. We were looking at all these questions I could change things to. Instead of asking you about the cost of the x-axis good, I could ask you about the cost of the y-axis good. So always trying to be thinking about things that could change and could I still answer this question? Okay. Any questions on this one before we keep moving? All right. Any other problems people want to see work through? So that's when we have a simultaneous shift, right? So let's see if I can do this from memory. If I get it wrong, let me know. Okay. So here, I believe I've got electric scooters and batteries are the first thing. So I've got the price of batteries, and they go up, down. Okay. So I then think about, okay, these are complements, I'm told, in consumption. Right? So before I even think about what direction is changing, if I'm looking at a market, how do I identify changes in my equilibrium price and quantity? Well, first of all, I need to identify where that equilibrium price and quantity start out, which is simply where supply is equal to demand. Anytime I see this word consumers or consumption, what should be shifting in this graph? Demand. It's the only shift I should be thinking about. So if I have something that requires batteries, first of all, we could think about, are these good? I told you that they're complements in consumption, and I try to give you examples where that makes sense. If I have something that requires batteries, if the price of batteries goes down, am I more or less likely to want to buy that good? More likely, right? So I'm going to see a demand increase. Now, how do I draw supply and demand increases and decreases? This is where I would not think about upward and down. I said, what's the best way to think about these shifts? If I see an increase in either supply or demand, think of this as a rightward shift, okay? And then if I have a decrease in supply or demand, I want to think about that as a leftward shift. Left, I'm getting closer to zero. Right, I'm getting further away. So my demand increase would be a rightward shift. What did that do to my equilibrium price and quantity in this case? So I've got my demand increase cause price and quantity to both go up. I'm just going to jot that down. So when I have these simultaneous shift examples, two things happening at the same time, I would draw out each individual effect. So the second effect I had, so I'm thinking about this market, and let's say we started out, and here was our kind of equilibrium, price, and quantity. Okay. So in this one, I believe what I told you is I've got now substitutes in production. So if I see this word producers or production, I should automatically be thinking about shifts in supply. So if I have electric cars, and then I then had what? Electric scooters. So here I think I said the price of electric cars goes up. Is that right? Okay. If I can change my production process to produce any electric moving device, right? What do I want to produce more of? Whatever has a higher price. So if electric cars, the price goes up, am I more or less likely to want to produce electric scooters? Less likely. Because I can change my production process over to producing this other good that I can now sell for more money. So this is going to be a supply what? I put, sorry, talking and writing. Instead of price, what should I wrote here? Quantity, right? So I'm thinking about here, the quantity that I want to produce of electric scooters because the price of electric cars went up, has went down, and I'm seeing a supply decrease. So once again, this is where it gets tricky. If I think about up or downward, I can confuse myself. If I remember that decreases are shifts to the left, my supply decrease would look something like this. The problem is it's decreasing, but what does it look like? It's shifting up, which is why I would not think about these as upward and downward shifts. It's counterintuitive. Increases, we're moving further away from zero. Shifts to the right. Decreases, doesn't matter if I'm looking at supply or demand, shifts to the left, getting closer to this point of zero. So where is my new equilibrium price and quantity? My prices went up and my quantity has went down. So this supply decrease caused price to go up, but quantity to go down. So if these happen at the same time, what is my total effect? Well, if they both push price up, I definitely know price is going to be going up. But what's happening to quantity? I don't know, or indeterminate. Oh, sorry, there we go. So anytime I have simultaneous shifts, something will be indeterminate, right? So if I were to go back to that problem, and now we're looking at the potential answers, and this is more of a test taking thing. Hopefully I didn't screw this up since we're now pivoting. There we go. So if I then think about, let's say I went to problem 14, and I don't know, let's say one of the answers was decrease, decrease. Anytime I have simultaneous shifts, I know that something will be indeterminate. Okay? Now, it could be price, or in our example, it was quantity. But I know something will be indeterminate. So if I'm like, man, this is a hard question, I don't know how to solve it, I've got to take a guess. Well, if I can remember something like that, just a test-taking technique, if there's a problem you're just really not sure on, at least try to do process of elimination and rule answers out you know can't be. So in this one, I could say, well, I know something's going to be indeterminate. I don't know how to draw this out. I forgot I have to do it at the same time. I at least know that something is indeterminate. I can rule A out right away. That gives me a slightly better chance if I'm just guessing. Now, obviously, you don't want to just have to be able to guess. But if you do, right, you can process of elimination, rule things out. And then it also prevents you, if I just start out with a problem and I rule out right away what I know can't be true, it allows me to catch obvious mistakes that I made. Right? So in these types of problems, if I have simultaneous shifts, something will always be indeterminate, right? Which I wasn't as friendly here because every answer had something that was indeterminate. If I did change that to where you can kind of start to rule some answers out. Okay? Any other problems we want to see work through here? Feeling good with every other problem? Yeah. Oh. So 13. Yeah, so if we're thinking about, no, I'm used to what I'm usually doing. Now I have to change this. Okay. So I've got what? Producers expect the price to be lower in the future. First of all, if I see this word, producer, and I'm thinking about changes to my equilibrium price and quantity, what should be shifting? Supply. Producer is supply, consumers are demand. So this is where that simultaneous change one is probably one of the more difficult questions on the exam. All right. I could also ask you, and you'll see there's a batch of questions on the practice exams where you only have one thing that's changing. But we talked about all these different determinants, so you need to know all the different determinants of supply and demand and how they would shift supply and demand. So one of the things that we had was expectations of future prices. So if I'm thinking about, if I've got, no, I forgot, was it higher prices in the future? Was it decrease? Okay. So if I expect prices to be lower in the future, what happens to current supply? Do I want to sell things when the price is higher or lower? Higher. So if I think the price is going to be lower tomorrow, what do I currently do? Ramp up my production. Try to sell as much as I can right now. Okay. So an increase in supply is going to be a shift to the supply or demand. Increases our shifts to the right. Everyone should be saying this in unison, right? Further away from zero. So what has happened to my equilibrium price and quantity? Prices went down, quantities went up. So expected prices, right? If I'm a producer, I want to sell more now. Now, I could have also changed this question to instead be, what if instead consumers, right, expect the price to be lower in the future? So if I'm a consumer, I should now be thinking about shifts in demand. So if consumers think the price is going to be lower tomorrow, what happens to their current demand for the product? Well, this is where it's a little bit easier usually to think about consumers because that's what most of us are. If the price is going to be lower tomorrow, do I want to buy it today or tomorrow? When do you want to buy things? When the price is low. So currently, if I think the price is going to be lower tomorrow, currently I'm going to not want to buy it. I want to hold out until tomorrow. So my current demand is going to decrease or shift to the left. What does that do to my equilibrium price and quantity? Decreases both of them, right? So we could do expected prices for consumers or producers. It's going to work in slightly different ways. Okay. Any other problems that people want to see work through here? Yeah. 8. So what is question 8? Oh, is this the right? Okay. All right, so I'm given 2 points, and I want to know the opportunity cost between those 2 points. And if we have a technology advance that impacts one of them, but not, that impacts both, what's going to happen? Okay, so I'll do some slightly different examples here, which I think would be more reflective of what you see in the exam. So I've got This is where it gets tricky because I now can't observe both of these. We'll try to think about what I have here. So if I've got, well, I want to find the cost of a cookie, right? So if I want to find the cost of something, what tells me that from my production possibilities curve? The slope. So I'm going to put that good on my x-axis, right? So I've got what? 125 to 150. So I'm looking at the quantity of cookies here. I've got my production possibilities curve, and I'm moving from, is it 125 to 150? And as a result, the other good, brownies here, it's going from 200 to 100. So how do I find the slope of a line? The change in y over the change in x. Y is changing by 100. X is changing by technically negative 125. So my slope here is -4, or the cost of one cookie is 4 brownies. Now I could have changed this question, right, to be instead, what is the cost of one additional brownie, or what is the cost of my y-axis good? The cost of my y-axis good is 1 over the slope. So at this same point, the cost of one additional brownie would be 0.25 cookies. Okay? So I can find the cost of either good. Okay? Any questions on that first half? Now, this question was a little bit easier, and I think in the practice exam I changed it a little bit. So on this one, if I have technology advancements that impact both goods, so if I'm only producing brownies, I can now produce more. So maybe I get some new fancy oven. If I'm only producing cookies, I can now produce more. What's happened in my production possibilities curve? It's shifted outward. Instead of a technology advancement, let's just say I saw a decrease in population. Well, if I have fewer resources or fewer workers, now it doesn't matter which good I'm producing, I can produce less. So having fewer resources actually caused that production possibilities curve to shift inward. Now, like I said, I believe this is on the second practice exam. And it might have different values, but for the sake that we have this, we'll kind of show you, I'll show you what I might ask you on the exam. Trying to use extreme facial expressions to get these points across, okay? So what I could ask you on this exam is instead, let's say I had my initial production possibilities curve, and that current point I'm at with the same values, so I know the slope was -4. Okay? Let's say I had a technology change, and I think this was similar to the second part of the question, but let's say now it only impacts cookie production. Okay? So if I have something that only impacts cookie production, what's going to happen? If I only produce brownies, the amount hasn't changed. But if I'm producing only cookies, I can now produce more. So let's talk through the intuition first. If I have a technology change that only impacts one good, essentially having better technology, I could now produce the same amount, but with fewer workers or with fewer. So what's happening to my marginal costs? They're going down. Well, what tells me the cost of that x-axis good? My slope. So hopefully, if I'm thinking about this, when I have a technology advancement that only impacts one good, what should be happening to the cost of that good? It's going down. It's less costly to produce it because I have this new awesome technology. So what should be happening to the slope? The cost of the x-axis good goes down. It should be flat. Sure enough, at any quantity, my curve is now flat. Or I've got a lower cost, right? I'm just choosing a hypothetical value here to represent that it's getting flat. So a technology change in a good is going to make the cost of producing that good go down, right? So technology advancement in that good causes its cost to be low. Now, another additional question I could ask is, let's say I have that technology advancement that impacts cookies, right? So here I had cookies, right? What's happening instead if I have that technology and it impacts cookies? what's happening to the cost of producing an additional brownie? Well, that is equal to what? 1 over the cost of my x-axis good, or 1 over the slope. So well, if the cost of my cookies are now lower, what's happening to the cost of my y-axis good or brownies? It's going up, right? Whatever good didn't experience the technology change, it's now more costly to produce that good because I now have a technology that would allow me to produce even more of that good that I'm foregoing, right? So even though I had an example in that question where it was a technology change that impacted both goods, so there I'm just getting these parallel shifts inward or outward, I could have a technology change that only impacts one of those goods, in which case I would only see a kind of shift, right, where that point would change just for that good, which changes the slope of my production possibilities curve, which changes my cost of productions of those two goods. Any questions on that one since I went a little bit off script of what the actual question was? Okay. Any other questions people have they want to see work through? Yeah. 9. Nope. Gosh, I'm so used to what I usually do that I'm forgetting that we're not doing that because this document claimer is not working. All right, so 9. Yeah, so this is like a point of distinction, and I might on the exam be less likely to ask you it as an individual question and more likely to combine it into a two-part question. So if I have a change in the price of a good, so here I chose gasoline. A change in the price of gasoline, is that going to shift the demand and supply curves? No, it just moves me to different points on the curve. So if I lower the price of gasoline, it's only going to impact the quantity demanded and the quantity supplied. It's moving me to different points on the supply or demand curve. So a lower price of gasoline is going to lead to a what change in my quantity demand. If prices go down, quantity demand is going to go up. People want to buy more. So I should see a quantity demand, not decrease, but increase. So I can rule that one out. Now, if I see a decrease in the price of gasoline, what's happening to my quantity supply? Producers are going to want to produce less than 4, or the quantity supplied is going to decrease. So this is one of those problems where maybe I'm like getting mixed up with supply and demand. But here, changes in the price of the good you're looking at do not shift or do not change the entire demand or supply curve. They only move us to different quantity demanded or quantity supply points on that same demand or supply curve. So the things that would increase or decrease demand and supply would have to be changes in something other than the price of the good you're looking at. Changes in the price of other goods, complements or substitutes, changes in income, changes in the cost of production, that changes in any one of these other things that we've talked about. Okay? Any other questions that people have? Yeah. So, what is the equilibrium price approximately of this good? It's going to be where supply is equal to demand. So if I'm looking at that's approximately what, like 55? Okay. If I'm instead looking at this price of 30, okay? So if I'm looking at a price of 30, once again, it's a change in the price of this good. So a lower price from that equilibrium, what happened to the quantity supplied? Quantity supplied should be lower, and quantity demanded should be higher. At that price of 30, the quantity supplied is 20, the quantity demanded is 70. So we said if the quantity supplied is ever less than the quantity demanded, we have people want to buy more than what's being provided, so we have a shortage. We're not in equilibrium. What happens is that price starts to increase. As the price increases, what happens to quantity supply? it starts to go up, and the quantity demanded it starts to go down. As long as there's a shortage, more and more companies join this market. Now they're only willing to because if they charge a slightly higher price, but they keep increasing the price, there's still more than enough people that want to buy the good. That only occurs until we get to this point where we're in equilibrium. If more firms join this market and raise the price even more, now the quantity demanded starts to be less than the quantity supplied. Well, if I'm supplying good and nobody buys it, what's the marginal benefit to me as a firm? Zero. All right? So we kind of stop at that equilibrium point. Any other questions that people want to see worked through here? We've got another 10 minutes. So maybe there's one I think would be worth going through, and we haven't talked anything about this, which I'm a little concerned about. That's okay. I would heavily review it, especially since it's the most recent thing. That's why I'm guessing we might have gotten no questions about elasticity today. But let's think about one like 25. This is going to be, I'm trying to choose questions, the simultaneous shift one, the two-person economy-wide production possibilities curve. Those are going to be pretty difficult questions. A question like 25 would also be pretty difficult. Okay. So if I'm looking at this, right, if I've got the unit elastic portion of the demand curve, and I'm currently looking at a price of 20, and then I'm decreasing the price. Okay. So if I can get this, there we go. When we think about the demand curve, downward sloping, there is a point somewhere in the middle where it's unit elastic. If it's unit elastic, the absolute value, how we always look at the price elasticity of demand, is going to be equal to what? 1, right? So we're kind of told that's in between prices of 25 and 24. Okay. I'm then kind of told in this problem, okay, if I'm at a price of, I think it was 20, and the price is lowered to 19. Okay. Well, I said one easy, it's kind of intuitive. The same demand curve, the elasticity changes depending on where I'm at. So elasticity measures responsiveness. When I'm more responsive, that's going to be at higher points on my demand curve. So at higher points on my demand curve, consumers are more responsive, or that elasticity is greater than 1. Because remember, what is the elasticity of demand? The percentage change in quantity demanded over my percentage change in price. If people are very responsive, they respond a lot to small changes in price, that fraction will be greater than 1. As we move down the demand curve, what's happening? People are becoming less and less responsive, or demand is becoming more inelastic. So down here on the lower portion of my demand curve, I know I'm on the inelastic portion, whereas up here above that unit elastic point, I'm on the elastic portion. So this is where we want to be able to, we can think about that concept. If I change this question to said, what portion of the demand curve are you on? Changing the price from 2019. Because I told you where the unit elastic portion is, you know you're on the inelastic portion. I think that was the first part maybe of the question. Okay. Now the second part of this question, and this is where I guess technically somebody asked me this in my office hours the other day. You can memorize a lot of this. You can memorize all the combinations of supply and demand increases and how that impacts the equilibrium price and quantity. You can then memorize if demand is elastic or inelastic, how does that impact total revenues? If you try to start rote memorizing, I just think that's going to be really difficult. There's too much information. Being able to draw out these concepts is going to be a lot more likely you remember how to do that and can arrive at the correct answer. Right? So here, what did we say is true about, and I'm talking and writing, what is true at the unit elastic point? Total revenue is maximized. As I move in either direction, I produce more or less, my total revenues start to fall. Okay? We said one easy way to remember this is if I sell nothing, my total revenue is price times quantity, so nothing. Right? So if I'm on the inelastic portion, if I'm lowering the price, that is doing what? Increasing my quantity. So if I'm on the inelastic portion, lowering the price, increasing quantity is doing what? Lowering my total revenues, right? So on the inelastic portion, when I lowered the price, I was actually causing total revenues to go down. So if I'm on the inelastic portion, what do I want to do in order to raise total revenue? I would want to increase the price or move back towards that unit elastic point. Now, to make this point, let's say I gave you a different problem. Once again, what could Professor Landis change in this question? Well, if instead I'm lowering the price from 28 to 27, well, now when I lower the price, because I'm looking at prices above that unit elastic point, I now know that I'm on the elastic portion. So there, lowering the price, what am I going to be doing? I'm selling way more units because demand is very elastic. So even though I'm losing some revenue on a lower price, because demand is very elastic, I'm gaining a bunch by selling way more units. So lowering the price when I'm on the elastic portion, what does that do? That actually causes my total revenues to go up. The exact opposite effect of when I'm on the inelastic portion. And then similar idea. Instead of doing price decreases for these two ranges, I could do price increases, right? Basically, moving away from that unit elastic point lowers my total revenue. Moving towards that unit elastic point increases total revenue. And I think it's fairly intuitive that as I move down the demand curve, elasticities are getting closer and closer to zero. The closer I get to zero, demand is becoming more and more inelastic. Zero means no response. Okay? So knowing this relationship between elasticity and total revenue, I can guarantee you see a question that looks like that on the exam, where I tell you the unit elastic point, I then give you a hypothetical change in price that tells you whether or not you're on the inelastic or elastic portion of the demand curve. And then given what change in price you're looking at, what is going to happen to total revenues? Okay. Now that's another very tough question. Those, along with simultaneous changes and those kind of two-person, those are probably separating these into deep ones, right? So before we kind of get all busy and packed up, I want to mention some things in the last couple of minutes. Okay. So on your way out, right? This is a little bit more for me. So if you go to that quizzes tab and on your way out, I've got this midterm exam attendance survey. So that should now pop up under the quizzes tab. I think I have it as 88.45 as the code to get in. We'll kind of check my memory here. 88.45, right? So if you want to enter that code in after clicking on that survey under the quizzes tab, right? The question, this isn't for points, this is more out of curiosity and some things that I might use this data for later on this semester, right? So are you here? It's just yes or yes. Answer either one. This is basically just me recording, were you here today? What I ended up wanting to do, I want to look at the correlation of attendance today and exam performance. I have a sneaking suspicion of what that correlation is going to be. And kind of I want to show this to you later on to prove to you. I try to stress it. Attendance in class, especially before these exams, coming ready with questions, ready to review them, is going to be very beneficial. These practice exams are going to look very similar. I'm reiterating this a lot, because they're the best representative questions you have of what that exam is going to look like. Okay? So, last minute opportunities, I will post an announcement about this to campus. In addition to what my office hours will be tomorrow, and I will post something this afternoon that will do a definitive 3-hour range of what those will be today. Try to be quiet for another minute. I'm trying to make you aware of opportunities to do well on the exam. Those office hours are another thing you can do on to get help. Those expert tutoring sessions, which I posted previously in the semester, they're over in Wiley Hall, room 329. Those are available tonight and tomorrow night. I will post a reminder of exactly what times those are, so you don't have to go back and find that earlier announcement. from memory, I believe it's 6 to 8 tonight and 6 to 9 tomorrow. Okay? I'm trying to make you aware of all these resources that are available to you in preparation for this exam. Make sure you're here early so we can get started right at 9:35. Other than that, best of luck studying, and I will see you guys for the exam on Thursday. And I'll see you this afternoon.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. That you did.
Yeah.
That same question.
Have a great day.
We only talk about the relationship with demand. The relationship with supply
Thank you.
is not quite, it's not, you can't relate it to total revenues.
See that?
Because the
Just
only
a minute,
thing that
2 hours.
generates revenues is stuff. So what could I actually relate supply to? To total revenues? We didn't dive into that. I won't ask you questions about that. We only focused on its relationship to total revenue because it's easier, well, for companies, they care about costs, but primarily their costs are what they are. So primarily that's what they're doing. Their loss just is, but yeah, you could do a similar thing, but no, we won't.
It's like a question. This graph.
Say it again.
Is this graph that's written to it?
Not quite. So it would actually be that they're interested. What are we using for the price? Demand equation. So demand would be like 50 minus 4Q times Q. So it's actually the derivative of the demand equation times quantity, in which case that's why we have this curvature, because quantity times, we'll have a quantity times a quantity, which is squared. So yes, it's the derivative, in fact, of total revenue, which would be the demand equation times.
Yeah, it's negative, so it's 50%.
Yeah. But that is a great question. You're thinking like next level. Yeah.
I feel like it's a simple question. So like for the possibility for Dexter's curve, right? So does that always mean like, for instance, like if you have like